impact investing, social finance, social entrepreneurship, and innovations to share this work they're doing. The discussions will be around new models of investing for social purpose, projects on the forefront of social and environmental change, and stories from the field and best practices for the future of food, people, and the planet. This weekend, we're welcoming California Freshworks and AgroEcology Fund. Representing California Freshworks is Esperanza Pallana. California Freshworks is a loan and grant program that provides financing to food enterprises who are working to increase access to affordable, healthy food in low-income and underserved communities in California. The AgroEcology Fund will be presented by Daniel Moss, who is the executive director. And the AgroEcology Fund is a multi-donor fund supporting agroecological practices and policies. The fund aims to support viable food systems, promote the economic well-being and human rights of small farmers and their communities, and mitigate climate change through low-input agriculture featuring sustainable soil and water use. Before I introduce our first speaker, which is Esperanza, a little bit more, I'm just going to do our land acknowledgement, which is very important to do at the outset of our webinar series. So I'll begin this event today by acknowledging that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous people from the beginning. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, as we gather here, there have been Aboriginal peoples who have been the stewards of this place. In particular, I acknowledge traditional territory of the Attawandan, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, and I'm located in Windsor, Essex County. So the most southern point of Canada, so right across the border is Detroit for me. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our province and country as a whole. We would also acknowledge that as we function virtually, especially in this year, we are relying on resources drawn from native and formerly native land to run our computers, lights, heat, and virtual connections we've come to depend on. As a settler, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and challenge of truth and reconciliation rural in our communities, and in particular bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous people, women and girls in particular, across our country. So as I mentioned, our first speaker is Esperanza Pallana. She's the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Community Vision, a community developmental financial institution based in San Francisco. She drives investment that institutes leadership by and honors the labor of people of color. Esperanza works to align organizational systems and initiatives that ensure that Community Vision's programmatic strategies are focused on creating measurable, sustainable societal change rooted in equity and justice. Her career has spanned more than 20 years in food systems, environmental health, and public health advocacy, always with a deep calling to promote racial and economic equality. I have lots more to share, but I will let her take it over and talk a little bit more about the programmatic work that she does at California Freshworks. Welcome, and thank you, Esperanza, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much for the introduction. And let me go ahead and get us kicked off with some information about Freshworks specifically. So as Director of Strategic Initiatives, there are a series of programs that I focus on, but today I'm going to talk about our food system financing program called Freshworks. Freshworks is actually, the history of it is, it started in 2011 and then was administered by Catherine Howard, who was at Capital Impact Partners. And in 2016, Freshworks moved over to Community Vision. And we basically did a redesign, took the lessons learned from the previous 5 years and integrated them into a really different kind of program, whereas before it had been a syndicated pool of funds, it's now a lender network. So there are 5 programmatic goals of California Freshworks. They look at healthy food access, economic development, racial and social equity, environmental stewardship, and local sourcing. And so our impact and metrics are based on those program goals. The structure of the program is there are 6 participating lenders within the network. They're listed here, but it's ourselves. So Community Vision is one of the participating lenders. Genesis LA, Self Help, Clearinghouse, NFF, and RCAC. Actually, I may have said and Capital Impact Partners. Actually, maybe there's more than 6. I may have counted that incorrectly, but. And we have our investors who are participating in it, both for credit enhancements and for overall, well, I should say for credit enhancements. And then as a lender network, we really look to the tools of each and every one of the participating lenders. So, you know, whoever is, you know, investing in their work is also investing in this program, so to speak. The area of the program covers, it's across California. And so again, wherever one of our participating lenders are active is a prospective place that Freshworks would focus. However, we do have specific tools within Freshworks, technical assistance grants and credit enhancements that are more geographically focused. And so we have, for the last 3 years, been focused in 5 main areas. That's been Contra Costa County, Alameda County, Yellow Sacramento area, Southern San Joaquin counties that are centered around Fresno, and then LA County, and some surrounding areas. So there's 5 rough geographic areas. In that time, we have actually been quite successful. This is a snapshot of the activity for those 3 years. And basically, we've had a total of 66 transactions. That's been a combination of grants, credit enhancements, and loans. We have been able to generate quite a number of early stage opportunities. And then one of the other aspects of the program that is both unique and has proved to be quite successful is market making roles. And so those are roles of folks who serve, these are typically third-party consultants that serve a role of, I'd say, project management. When you have, you know, let's say a town or developer that's interested in having a grocery store, you know, you typically need somebody who's going to do the legwork to identify the operator, to get the market analysis done, to really bring all the players together to bring it to fruition. And it's typically not any one of those people that have the idea, but they really need, you know, someone else to do it. So market makers came in, I think, more structured around that idea. And then we really saw the opportunity to engage market makers with being that go-between for a number of early stage projects to really help, you know, bring awareness of the services, but also, you know, bring people into to access the services. You know, there's always that gap in folks either knowing about it, and then once they know about it, needing someone to navigate them into the services. So between early stage and market making opportunities, you know, I would say the program has longevity to it. So in our first 3 years, you know, we deployed over $76 million. And that's a number, like I said before, a combination of loans. And this is, again, loans and financing through the network of lenders, credit enhancements, and then our grant making specifically. We work with Pacific Community Ventures, PCV, on our evaluation of the program. They have been longtime partners of Freshworks for the evaluation, and based on those program goals, you know, some of the report out and priorities for us have been 86% of our loan recipients, you know, and 93% of our grant recipients identifying as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, 33% of loan recipients, or 55% of grant recipients identifying as female, investments and services in low access areas, 100% of the businesses, and these are businesses across the value chain. That's another aspect of this program design, is support across the value chain. It's not only focused on grocery stores, it's looking at the many different ways in which you build a healthy food system that will ensure access to healthy food. We really do approach this as a community development issue in order to ensure access to healthy food. 61% are located in communities with poor health and wellness outcomes, and 44% are located in low-income, low-access communities. Now, one thing I do want to point out is while the business itself may not be located, the address may not be within a low-income, low-access community, they are all ensuring access to healthy food within low-income, low-access communities. That's our bottom line priority of this program. So of all of the program goals, which we have a scorecard, and like I said, we report, our impact with them, but of all of the impact that a project can have, and typically we do have, I would say, most of our projects are high impact. The bottom line is, of course, access to healthy food. So new job creation, we've been quite successful with positions that are with opportunities that come up that are actually creating new jobs. And then maintaining ongoing jobs. And year 3 pipeline indicates a vast increase in employment figures, and 57% of Freshworks supported businesses that don't currently provide benefit plans intend on doing so. And so, the other aspect of the businesses and really the ecosystem of projects that we work with is we have had a great fortune of making contact with a number of nonprofit and business leaders who are deeply embedded within community, who really have a strong eye for building an equitable and sustainable food system. And so in that, they tend to have consistent values that they are implementing throughout their enterprise. And that is something that we do ask about when we work with PCV and do the evaluation. Our stakeholder interviews really do dig more deeply into how are they structuring their own institution, because, as part of access to healthy food, it really is about how is the food system structured and how are we operating inside and outside. And then, of course, microlending, a financing gap remains. We have some of the participating lenders provide microlending, but this does continue to be for community level interventions and smaller businesses, a need and a gap. As I mentioned, we have market makers. We have engaged 6 market makers across 4 regions to cultivate high touch, high impact deals. And so that really is, we are working with people who truly understand where we're aligned and the best way to provide those services. That has been amazing to have the opportunity to engage folks who can really bridge the conversation between, business or nonprofit leaders' need and the services that can be provided through our network. I wanted to give a snapshot of some of these projects. These are looking specifically at credit enhancements. And so for anyone, attending today who doesn't know what that is, again, one of the benefits of the program, we're able to offer up to 25% top loss through a participation or guarantee on up to a $3 million loan to attract investment to a project that might be nearly capital ready, but is considered a higher risk. And so we can help to offset risk and attract investors into the project by utilizing a credit enhancement. Some lessons learned and where we're at right now. So of course, pipeline development takes dedicated time and attention. Market making has been key. It's been really effective paired with the other tools that we offer. And as I mentioned before, it's also, allowing that high touch engagement is really allowing us to be very intentional and very community centric. It is very important that we, in our work in general, community vision and with our programs, and definitely embedded within Freshworks, is the idea that we really want to support community where they are at with what they want and have them lead. And so support the leaders, whether, informal network of leaders, running small businesses, farms, whoever they may be. They're the ones that are dedicating their lives to building a food system that is much needed and will ensure access to healthy food, which brings me to the point of building equitable food systems. So, strengthening, we're really looking at, how do we strengthen that food system? Last year, in the midst of community crises and public health crises, we were really able to support a lot of the projects that were banding together, who, they saw where the gaps were happening. Their response in crises was to reroute, to shift their operating models quite rapidly, to reroute produce that was anticipated for smaller businesses and restaurants, relieving a lot of actually small farmers and small farmers of color kind of in a, leaving them hanging without where to go with, their produce. Our projects were able to connect with one another, and they were either rerouting to food banks, or actually a lot of them were generating CSAs or expanding CSAs and partnering with CSAs to ensure that the produce was going somewhere effective. And a lot of those CSAs were ensuring that vulnerable populations and vulnerable, to impacts of COVID specifically, were continuing to get access to healthy food. So that was actually quite amazing to be a part of and to witness. Other lessons learned with Freshworks at this point is working with startups and early stage enterprises. So that continues to be a need. I would say, from, as you can see here, CFI lending does not consistently support startups. It's really, there's a lot of, I would say, well, there's definitely a lot of opportunity, but there's a lot of variables. And so it depends on what the project is and who's running it. And, is it a new business owner and a new startup? Is it a longtime business owner that has a new startup? What are all the variables that we would have to evaluate? But that does tend to be one of the areas that needs support, as folks are, we're making strides in our food system, and there are a lot of early stage enterprises that do need support. So again, looking to the need for microfinancing and the need for runway capital, as well as expanded technical assistance to ensure that those leaders, generating those projects have the tools that they need to be successful. And yeah, that's where we're at with Freshworks. We're going to be releasing our year 3 results, soon, say within the next couple of months, and are just really excited about the progress that we've made with this program.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm fiercely writing everything down. That's what I always do. If you have any questions, as Jessica noted very early on, you can throw them in chat now for her. We're going to answer all of them in the Q&A portion after Daniel does his presentation. But feel free to write them now so you don't forget. And you can put them there. If you prefer to verbalize it, maybe write something like ask out loud after you put the question in chat, or at that time you can raise your hand or do something during the Q&A if you do want to say it out loud. Thank you so much, Esperanza. That was absolutely incredible. I can't believe the support and the level of support you offer to entrepreneurs as a place-based entity in the US. It's really incredible. I have so many questions. I just learned so much from you. The credit enhancement portion, I think, of the 3 pillars that you offer seems like a fantastic opportunity for businesses. So maybe I have some questions around that for you, because that's new to me. Anyways, okay, moving on. Introducing Daniel.
Great. Oh, that's my prompt.
So I'll
you already introduced me, so that's good.
No, I have a little more to say about you.
No, that's quite all right.
Okay, I'll let you take it over then.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Esperanza, for that great presentation. And I learned a ton too. And I'll make a couple of comments back to your presentation during the course of mine. And I look forward to the questions and ensuing conversation. Can you see my presentation okay? Is it coming through? Yeah, I'll assume it is unless you tell me otherwise. So the AgroEcology Fund, it's a little bit of a different animal than I think than what we just saw, but very related. The AgroEcology Fund, we mobilize resources to advance agroecology, fostering the well-being of people and the planet. And we organize our work around 4 strategic directions. And I think the most relevant for this conversation is the first one, which is the shift and leverage significant financial resources towards agroecology. I'll get into that in a minute, that the resources aren't necessarily oriented towards agroecological enterprises exclusively. In fact, much more so towards civil society organizations that are related to agroecological enterprises. Importantly, we work on strengthening political and economic systems to enable agroecology to thrive. So obviously kind of the enabling environment in which businesses operate. We work with our grantees. So we principally work with grant dollars that we offer to civil society organizations working in the agroecology space. We support them in influencing the global conversation about solutions to global hunger. One of the big challenges, as you all know, is the kind of the hijacking of the conversation that big ag feeds the world, industrial agriculture feeds the world, GMOs feed the world. So we're continuing to improve our evidence base and our ability to communicate, to transmit to folks the promise of agroecology. And the fourth thing, very importantly, is co-create and share agroecology knowledge and practice. So we know one of the real beauties of agroecology is its kind of place-based territorial dimension in which farmers are recognized as co-creators of knowledge. And it's not merely kind of a technology transfer from some proprietary technology, for example, GMOs that are given over to farmers and then they're producing for markets in far-flung places. So we are a pooled fund of 30 plus donors. So we principally have private foundation members from the US, Europe, Asia. Do we have a Canadian foundation? I'm not sure. I don't think we do, unfortunately. So something to work towards. We support a diversity of collaboratives around the world, and we have our priority areas that include quite a multitude: food sovereignty and food security, health and nutrition, biodiversity, community-led resource management, gender equity, co-creation and sharing of knowledge and innovation, indigenous knowledge and indigenous rights, responsible governance and broad civil society participation, livelihoods, and agroecological enterprises. So it's kind of a I don't want to say a laundry list, that sounds a little bit disparaging, but there's a lot of desired impacts, a lot of things that we hope that we are fostering through supporting agroecology. And just to say a word about where these priorities areas come from, I mean, you may be aware that agroecology has been something discussed. It's gotten a lot of traction, especially at the level of the Committee on Food Security inside the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. And it's a little bit interesting for this conversation because I'm assuming for the purposes of Canada and California that agroecology is not as much used as, for example, regenerative agriculture, organic agriculture, no-till agriculture, conservation agriculture. I mean, there's a lot of things that are kind of sister approaches, and we're very inclusive. The term that we have been using is agroecology. We're married very closely to social movements around the world, especially in Latin America, that have been using agroecology as their kind of organizing principle. And that organizing principle is also represented in sort of foundational documents within the Committee on Food Security in the UN. And I just have this screenshot here of this panel, this report that they commissioned from a high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition that talks about agroecology and other innovations. And there's a movement within the UN system, conversations with member governments about transitioning their food systems towards something more agroecological. Of course, it's a very contested space, obviously, where there's a lot of pressure from industrial agriculture to preserve those spaces, that space and that agricultural development more towards biotech approaches. Our principal mechanism for finance and support is grants. And so we're offering grants of 1 to 2 years, about $100,000 per grant. We fund collaboration. So we're looking for multi-stakeholder coalitions. There'd certainly be a farmer association in the mix. There might be a university in the mix helping on research issues. There might be an incubator, accelerator in the mix helping on enterprise development. But we're looking for that kind of broad constellation and support cooperation among these actors, because that, as we just looked at before, if you're really going to approach the various kind of co-benefits, public goods from agroecology, you need to work across a broad swath of collaborators. This past year, we were really challenged to keep up with smaller grants around COVID-19 emergency response. So we support, for example, in Manila, the Philippines, in Harare, Zimbabwe, we were working with a lot of producers of agroecological producers that were looking to do workarounds in their rural areas and in their proximate urban areas. So trying to produce healthy food for local urban markets. So, you know, those were smaller grants. And then we're doing a new fund now, kind of a deep dive into the Yucatan region of Mexico, and we'll be doing deeper dives in West and East Africa this year as well, because we are, well, I'll show you a slide in a second. And more beyond grant making, we're also working with these collaborations on generating evidence about the efficacy of agroecology and to communicate the results. So we know that we want them to be able to shift their food systems, and they have to be capable of showing that agroecology works. You know, it works in terms of productivity, it works in terms of biodiversity preservation, it works in terms of gender equity, et cetera, et cetera. And we want to support them in researching their work and then being able to communicate it. We want to leverage more investments in agroecology. So we work very closely with other foundations. I mentioned that we have 30 plus in our network, but that's a pretty small, you know, we're talking about trying to move billions and billions of dollars into agroecology. That's what needs to happen. So we're working with public and private sources, and especially with bilateral and multilateral development agencies, which tend to invest in agricultural development in the developing world, which is where the lion's share of our work happens. And then we're supporting, we do work a little bit directly, and this is really a nascent area of work for us, directly with agroecological enterprises to access investments of patient capital. So generally speaking, we work kind of globally. We have kind of a very light, we purposely support agroecology movements a little bit everywhere, and we're kind of new. So over the past 8 years or so, we've been able to move about $10 million to the lead organizations, refers to the leaders of the collaborations, and then the collaborations have a spillover effect of working with many hundreds of grassroots organizations. As I mentioned, the working with agroecological enterprise is a little bit new for us, and one way we've been approaching this is with our colleague, the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, another donor network. We formed something called TIFS, Transformational Investing in Food Systems. I think I saw Rex Raymond on the call, who is the executive director of TIFS. So welcome, Rex. And the intention there is to work to amplify pathways, share insights, and develop tools to support principles-aligned integrative food system investing. And the kind of, I suppose, our comparative advantage in launching this from the foundation world is that the foundations, generally speaking, in private foundations, they're sitting on enormous endowments. So granting only 5% of the value of their assets, but sitting on, in some cases, $1 billion. And there's more and more interest, partially due to people being called out for their contradictions, that on the one hand, they're supporting sustainable agriculture with their grants, and then with their, stock exchange investments, they're supporting some the opposite. So we're looking for alignments, and we're looking to encourage more what they call program-related investment or mission-aligned investments, so that their grants and their investments are aligned. And so the TIFS program is seeking to work to kind of marry that those two worlds that are also often too often bifurcated, and with the end result to encourage investments in agroecological and other types of enterprises similar. I think here I'll just say a couple of words, because I know probably everybody on this call is aware of the agroecological enterprises and their the ways in which they create a virtuous cycle in their communities about regenerative and resilient economies, circular economies, and we need a vibrant and principled agroecological entrepreneurial sector to encourage the kind of policy environment to garner political power to transform agriculture. So if you have kind of a theory of change about, well, if we're looking to change the whole food system, unless these small agroecological enterprises are supported, unless they have a political voice to, for example, shift subsidy structures. So we see a lot of, hijacking of public subsidies towards industrial agriculture, not towards the kind of enterprises that Esperanza described. We need some political power to change those priorities as well, and we're aware of what they do in the communities, and we're also aware of the importance of bringing enterprises together to collaborate. Let's see, did I lose my capacity? Oh, something happened here. Oh, there we go. Okay. So just a couple of quick glances at what we're supporting. In Brazil, we're supporting a Copseralo cooperative in the collection and processing of the baru nut and other savanna species. And they've created a brand that they mostly market domestically, a little bit of export, but it's really a domestic market product. And in West Africa, we're supporting a women's network across 5 countries called Somla Solution, and they produce and market, among other things, a brand of bouillon cubes that's derived locally and not made from, kind of the high sodium stuff that we're used to purchasing in the supermarket. And just to say on this work with the Somla Solution, it's not that the AgroEcology Fund is so much supporting the enterprises themselves with loan capital. It's that we're supporting this network, the Somla Solution, which is really a broad advocacy network and support network for the women entrepreneurs within. So, we invest more in this case in kind of organizational infrastructure of the network. And less so directly in any arrangements we might have with direct support to the enterprises. It's kind of that idea of a cascading effect where these women live within a network, and that network also represents their political voice. We're doing a kind of interesting project right now in Africa. So we've teamed up with one of our partner organizations, the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. This is a broad continental network across Africa, works in 50 countries there. And they're largely working with governments in Africa to shift the investments in their climate action plans and in their biodiversity plans, really well aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, to try to move more attention towards agroecology, towards more investment in agroecology. And they're interested in supporting agroecological enterprises on the continent of Africa, because those are, a critical part of the landscape that is necessary to, supply families, to support producers and supply families with healthy food. And they're also aware that the political dynamics are such that you really need a kind of agroecological business association, essentially, or business associations. We're not talking about one grouping that can apply political pressure for the kind of shifting of policies and the shifting of investment priorities. I'm especially thinking of subsidies, which are a real problem. In the research, we found that we've just been interviewing entrepreneurs and service providers. So service providers of incubators, accelerators, loan funds, et cetera. And in talking to the entrepreneurs, we're learning that this is their self-identified activities, that they're working on landscape level changes for more sustainable land and water management. They're improving food security, sustainable alternative to conventional or industrial production. So this is a lot about also input substitution. So purchasing less imported fertilizers and pesticides, manufacturing their own, reestablishing linkages between producers and consumers, and strengthening local food markets and autonomy. And these are kind of, when we talked before about what are some of the public goods that agroecological enterprises generate, these are some of the public goods that we heard from them about what role they're playing. So, as you would expect, here's a couple of key findings from the research we've been conducting so far. This is kind of a work in progress, and so it's preliminary. The entrepreneurs face a challenging policy and market environment. There's, usual competition. In the African case, they're facing really challenging policies in terms of importation of food. And you especially saw that during COVID, that you saw, high priority placed, or that kind of food access was through supermarkets that are largely stocked by imported goods, and a lot of shutdown of the kind of what they call territorial markets, the kind of municipal plazas, farmers markets, which were places where people would be able to access local foods, local healthier foods. There are, various configurations of how these enterprises are working. Some of them are formed together in cooperatives and associations. They're producing very diverse range of crops. A lot of traditional cereals, millet, sorghum, rice, corn, yams, et cetera, and tubers and dairy. Not so much working at the export level of some of the commodity crops that you might think of in terms of, African exports, coffee, cacao. They're largely relying on their personal and group savings. They're not really accessing external forms of support. The grants and bank loans and low interest make up a kind of, relatively small percentages of how they're conducting their businesses. And they're also importantly accessing non-monetary support, like technical assistance that may be coming from a non-governmental organization, or maybe coming from a government extension bureau, business advisory services, and incubator and accelerator programs. And they're one of the things that they're finding is that some of the support that does come from outside, from support organizations, NGOs, et cetera, is more relative to production over the other aspects of value adding, processing, business skills, and marketing. The majority of the folks that we were surveying are young enterprises, less than 10 years old, with revenue under $49,000, so quite small. And some of the challenges that they face with the investors with whom they interact are a few characteristics. So one of them is that the investments offered tend to be too large. We just saw before that these have $49,000 and less in revenue, and the investors want to make bigger investments. That agroecology is as a viable business model, which includes the kind of, at the heart of agroecology is those kind of public goods that are generated, clean water, clean, healthy soil, et cetera. Those are not valued. And so it doesn't appear as a financial benefit to the investor. And that part of the problem with marketing agroecology is that there's not really any kind of market bump up, no premium. As is, for example, in some types of organic marketing. There's a lot of focus from the investors on productivity and income, and again, the kind of other benefits are largely ignored. And the question about local territorial markets is an important one. Most of the investors are interested in collateralizing with contracts with exporters. Which is not something that this universe, this ecosystem of small agroecological enterprises has. And then again, there's more of a focus on the commodity crops for export over the indigenous food. And just this is probably not surprising, but most of the investors with whom they may have contact are not from Africa, so they're focused they're from Europe and the United States, and they're also focused on a limited number of kind of powerhouse countries in Africa, like for example Senegal and Kenya, and doesn't reach into the many other countries. So I just wanted to leave with a couple of questions that we might, if we have time, to chew on. So how do we ensure that the small agroecological enterprises receive investments that do not offer investors financial returns? So that kind of blended capital, patient capital that also account for support for the activities that they offer that don't show up on the bottom line. How do we tailor financial and non-financial services to best support small agroecological businesses? I know Esperanza addressed that as well, and I know that the fund itself, the Fair Food Fund, is really grappling with this issue. How do we encourage closer alignment between agroecological enterprises and agroecological movements to scale up agroecology? So again, this is kind of our theory of change, that the transformation of the food system happens through the power of agroecological movements. The movements need the entrepreneurs within them. There's not always the best, there's not always close alignment between the kind of, what would you say, businesses and kind of scrappy social movement type organizations, but they're natural allies, and how can we support that alignment and that alliance? And then what support do the entrepreneurs and service providers need to create this enabling environment for agroecological businesses? So we know that the success of the businesses is reliant, not just on the what we can help offer them in working capital and marketing contracts, but also in this question about, for example, the subsidy structures, trade relations. These are all these big picture policy things that are affecting them. How can we support both the entrepreneurs and the service providers, who are also sort of hampered in the sense that they're sort of, as they should be, they're focused on the entrepreneurs themselves, but they need to be cognizant of the wider business environment, and how can they be a force also for helping engender those kind of changes. So I think I will leave it at that and look forward to the discussion. Thank you so much. Let me stop.